and you don't have to have a whole lot of money. You don't have to have a big fancy boat. You don't have to buy a lot of complicated equipment, and you can go out and have really awesome adventures. If that's what you're looking for.
John Stone is an ocean sailor that makes passages, often by himself on his old Cape Dory, and he loves teaching other people how to go make those passages too. We got a chance to sit down with John and ask him questions for people who want to go ocean sailing. Questions like, which boat do you use? What gear do you need? And John's philosophy is interesting because he's not going to tell you to go buy a brand new boat with all kinds of fancy stuff on it. He takes a rather simple approach. I won't spoil it for you. Let's hear from John. Thank you for taking the time to join me. I know you're probably a pretty busy guy.
Are you kidding? An hour to talk about sailboats?
Yeah, that's what I always say. Like I'll talk about sailboats anytime with anybody.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's all fun, man.
So I guess my introduction to you was your YouTube channel, and I've just like been poring over it, watching all the crazy stuff you do, and the kind of sailor that you are is this like ocean going navigational solo, like doing these crazy things.
Well, it's not so crazy. I always try to project it like, people can do this. Doesn't have to be a big complicated boat and don't need a lot of expensive equipment. In fact, I think the less complicated and the more reasonable size the boat, the better the experience, the greater chance you'll have success, the more fun you'll have, the more interesting people you'll meet, because when you have a big expensive boat, people don't approach you, I don't think, as
Yeah.
easily as they approach you with boats that average people sort of see themselves in. You know that from your own experience.
Yeah, yeah. What's your story with Yves Gelina?
Oh, Eve. Well, when I was looking for a wind vane for my boat, uh, I did research like all the viewers do. I was just reading about different wind vanes, and I came across the his website, and he had some great videos on there. And then I just thought, he used to have a 5 minute video, I think, of his voyage on Jean du Sud around the
Yeah.
world. And I thought, well, that's just the little brother to my boat. And so if that vane works that well on his boat, I have a real high degree of success. It'll work well on my boat. And so I reached out to him and he was great. I met him up at the Annapolis Boat Show one year. I guess it was 2008. And we had a really nice chat. And I put my order in for the vane. And then we just kind of developed a friendship over the year, emailing each other back and forth. And he's just been fantastic, just a great guy. And then, on one of my videos, I talked about I had trouble with the wind vane, and he was just great helping me through it. And I ended up taking the whole vane apart, and that's when I realized just how genius it is. Anybody can make something complicated, but it really takes a smart person to make something really effective, but really simple. And that vane is so simple. I was just blown away by it. So we just became friends over that, and he's just been great.
Man, I he was one of my heroes in my early days when I had my I think it was my second sailboat. I had a 25 CNC Redline, and that's I guess kind of the sailor that I've always been is I'm not making, these passages and stuff. It's been just a lot of racing since I was very young. It's been racing on the Great Lakes, like Detroit Yacht Club, Cleveland, just all over anything on the Great Lakes. I'm there, and so many different boats. And then when I went down south, I've done a couple of small crossings. I wouldn't even call it a crossing because it's the smallest ocean passage I think that you can ever make, which is Miami to Bimini, right? And I've done that 5 or 6 times now on different people's boats and my own boat. And so I'm not the kind of sailor that you are. You do this, like to me, this next level navigational kind of sailing, whereas the kind of sailing I've done is just like this island hopping stuff. But I when I had my 25 and I started to set my goals on the things that you're doing, I was like, "Why?" And I want to go places and do some fun stuff. I started researching, what boat to get, and I went down that rabbit hole for a few years. And of course, kind of landed probably the same place you did on these old Carl Alberg boats, and fell in love with the Alberg 30. And there's a bunch of Alberg 30s here in the Midwest, and I went to see 5 or 6 of them in different states of repair. And one of them was mint, but the guy wanted like 60 grand for it. And I was like, oh man, it's an old small boat for that kind of money. And then, of course, I stumbled across Yves, and I was like, this guy, and of course I went down the rabbit hole with him. This guy took an Albert 30 right from new and sailed it around the planet, and in the process invented this servo pendulum thing. So I just got obsessed with the Albert 30, with him, with his journey. That boat actually came up for sale in the last couple of years. I saw it for sale, and I went, oh man, a chance to own one of my heroes. But I met him at Annapolis too. I went and I saw the Cape Horn tent in Annapolis, and I was just this young, bright-eyed kid. And I went up and I went, hey, I love this thing. I love the guy who invented it. And he said, really? Hang on a second. And he went in the back, and out he walks. And I'm just face to face with this man. And I went, wow, like just this serendipitous moment for me. So he's always held a place in my heart. That boat's always held a place in my heart.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I guess what I would say is you're only one ocean voyage away from doing anything I do. I mean, if you're a good sailor, that's what I always tell people is it's just sailing. It doesn't matter how long the voyage is. It's just sailing. It's just sailing for longer distances. And, but not everybody wants to do that. That's to me, that should be the discriminator is you just don't want to do it. Not that you don't think you can do it. And anyway, but as for Eves, yeah, I've got his book, which I read a few years ago. And then I watched his film, and just a great story, and a very intrepid, old school, tough, just keep on keeping on.
So you continued on and ended up with a Cape Dory. Like how'd that happen?
I guess the to be completely truthful, I actually wanted a Bristol Channel cutter, and I just couldn't afford it. I flew out to California with my best friend, and we went to Long Beach. They had Bristol Channel Cutter convention out there, and all these guys had rebuilt their own boats or built them from kits and everything, and they were just great. I loved them. I just think they're really just a beautiful, pocket cruiser. Actually, bigger than a pocket cruiser, but um, just I couldn't really make it work. And then I I was pretty determined to get one, and my wife was pregnant at the time, and she gave me a card that said we're going to need a bigger boat, and she had twins, and so I doodled on that for a while, trying to figure out how to make a Bristol Channel cutter work, and I just couldn't make it work. It wouldn't work. So I began looking bigger. And I'd been at the Annapolis Boat Show. I'd actually been on Talus in the Pardis boat, and they had a Cape Dory 36 there. Actually, it was a Robin Hood 36. I think it was Legacy. And I got on it, and I looked at all the other boats, and it just wasn't what I was looking for. And as soon as I got on it, I thought, this is a seagoing boat to me. It felt like a seaboat. So I just started looking. How old was I then? I was 40, 40 something. And I was coming up on the end of my career in the Marines. I knew I had to do something. So I just determined that I was going to look at Cape Dory 36s. I looked at a Cal 40, which I really liked. It was in horrible shape. And I found it on the Sassafras River at the Cape Jor or at Georgetown Marina.
Oh
It was
wow.
under snow. A guy was trying to unload it. It was pretty down on its luck. And I got it then, and that was 2001. I actually sailed it back to towards Annapolis on April Fool's Day. And then I hauled it out, and I had orders for a duty station in Texas. I went there, I moved the boat down there thinking I would retire and I'd finish my boat there, but the war started, and one thing led to another, and I spent another almost 8 years in my boat sitting in a boat shed in Texas while I was finishing up my career. And then when I retired, I just moved the boat right here to my backyard, and that's how I got involved in that particular boat, and it actually worked out great.
Why do you go straight across? Why not? I guess for the viewers or for the practical sailor reader that would normally go down to Florida and then island hop. That's what I would do. How come you don't? You just go straight to the Virgin Islands.
I don't like motoring, and I love sailing. And instead of making 50 miles a day, I can make 150 miles a day, and I'm there in 12 days.
Yeah.
And I'm in the Virgin Islands. It would take 6 weeks or 2 months
Yeah.
to go, to motor down and do the thorny path and all that. So, to me, it just gets me there. But I love ocean sailing, and it's not the destination. It, it's more than just the journey. It's just sailing. I mean, I just love sailing.
Yeah.
And that to me is the mission. The mission is sailing.
Yeah.
And offshore, I get such a wide variety of opportunities to sail. I mean, all the different conditions, you really test yourself, and you're just away from everything. I just find it very soul enriching.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
Um, if there obviously a lot of people buying boats now are just buying a 40-foot white plastic boat. Um, but there is a margin for the practical sailors out there that want to buy the older battleship sort of ocean going bigger keel, encapsulated keel particularly, but with very few people making them anymore. It's very hard to get a new one, and if you do want a new one, you're 500,000 plus, right, for a Kraken or somebody who's doing the keel properly. Is Island Packet and Kraken, not very many other people. So for the folks that are looking for these older boats, Cape Dories, Albergs, maybe Bristol, what would you tell them? Is it worth going down this road? Because it's been sort of a long path, right?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is I don't have anything against any boat. I like all sailboats. And I think whatever boat gets you to where you want to go, and it meets your needs, and it's up to the task, then I think that's great. So I don't have anything against fin keel boats or balanced rudders or fractional rig. I don't have anything against any of that. I mean, I think all boats are a compromise, and we just have to do our homework and decide what compromises we can live with and which ones we can't. And not everybody had the time to spend to do what I did. And I recognize that. And I've met some great sailors out there on real, white Clorox bottle boats, and they're having a great time. And that to me is the mission for them. You get out there and you sail. But I wanted a boat. I didn't want that. I just didn't want a boat like that. I wanted a boat that moved me every time I saw it, that made my heart pound. And there's different boats that would do that, but this one does that for me. And I also think I had lived on a boat as a kid. I've been sailing since I was 12, and I knew I wanted a really simple, reliable boat that was completely dry and that I could fix everything. And the only way I was going to get there is if I did it myself. And as you pointed out, I couldn't afford a new boat. That's just not possible. My boat, I probably got about, this is a guess, I got about 6,000 hours in it. That's a lot, but I did a lot. And I always tell people, you don't have to do everything I did. If I had kept the original spar and hadn't changed the interior around and just focused on strengthening the boat, glassing the whole deck joint, making some changes to the interior a little bit, create more storage, refine the rig, you're probably looking at maybe 2,000 hours. And a lot of that 6,000 hours was not spent actually working on the boat. It was reading. It was doing, it was getting on the internet at night and looking at classic boats, looking at how the interior is put together, looking at joinery. I'd get to a joint in the boat somewhere where I needed to figure out how to fit these pieces together. And I'd spend time in fine furniture making, Wooden Boat magazine, some of the classic boat brokerages online, and get down in the interiors and just really look at how they're put together. So that took a lot of time and ordering parts. And, it's not all out there, working a hand plane or grinding fiberglass for that 6,000 hours. A lot of it's just doing your homework. So I included everything. And on my website, which I documented everything, I didn't open it to comments because I didn't want to have a debate about it and I didn't want to get distracted
Yeah.
and I didn't want to waste time. So every night I'd come in from working on the boat and I would blog it on my website. And I did that really for two reasons. And my best friend had told me, he goes, when you do this, you need to have a website. He builds airplanes.
Hmm.
And that's real big in the airplane community. And he said, you got to do it for two reasons. One, you got to pay back. You got to pay back to the community because you've been looking at websites and stuff. So you got to contribute back. But he said, the other thing you got to do is by documenting it, you can go back yourself when you get in that dark place and you think you haven't done anything. And you go back and you look at it and you say, wow, I really have done a lot. I feel like I'm moving at 1 mile per hour, like pond water, but I've done a lot. I've made a lot of progress. So I found that to be really helpful to me. And even now, I'll go back and look at it when I'm trying to remember how I did something. So I put a lot of detail in it for others, but also to help myself remember, how did I do this? What were
Yeah.
the measurements? How did I set my saw up to do that? So all that's out there for people to use. And I would encourage people to also take the time to set up a little blog. As you know, YouTube it takes a long time.
It's effort. Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of effort. I find the worst part is remembering to grab the camera when I go do a thing because I'm like, I got to do that motor mount today, and I'm just like, okay, get the socket set and get this, and bring oil, and then I'm like, oh right, I got to film it, and it's a whole extra 15% of effort to add that, and a lot of times I won't do it.
Right, right. I'm not really that good at it. It takes me a lot of time to do it. Um, and I think that kind of brings up the other idea that I always ask myself, and I'm still not 100% sure, why I'm even documenting on YouTube. That's a thing that all of us have to figure out. And I think ultimately I just want to share with others that you can do this.
Yep.
That's really the gist of what I think my channel is about, is encouraging other people that you can do something like this and you don't have to have super deep pockets to do it. There's all kind of boats out there. I know I have a friend the other day who bought a Cape Dory 31 for $5,000 and totally sailable. We went out sailing on it last weekend.
Oh wow, it's functional.
$5,000. It wasn't even for sale. He'd seen it in the marina and he had asked the guy about, hey, I've got a friend that's interested in one of these boats. Could we look at yours? Could we go on it and look at it? And the guy said, oh yeah, absolutely. And oh, by the way, if you're interested, I'll sell it to you. And that's the price they came up with. And
Yeah.
that boat it may not be ready to cross oceans, but it's not too far away. And it's a really nice boat.
I guess that brings me to gear. So if you had to do it again, and maybe this is great advice for somebody who's just starting on the same or similar journey to you. We mentioned the Cape Horn wind vane. I'm with you there. I think that's there's the monitor and all the other ones, but the Cape Horn is my favorite, and it sounds like yours. What other gear do you think is critical while keeping it simple?
Not much. I mean, seriously, you don't need much. And you know, the thing is, the more gear you put on the boat, the more time you spend installing gear. And a lot of this equipment and technology that people are putting on there, there's manuals that are this thick you have to read. it takes a lot of time to really be able to use some of that equipment well. And that's time you could spend reading. Well, let's see what I'm working through now. You could read this,
Yeah.
and you would get more out of this, in my opinion, than you would out of having a big fancy chart plotter where everything is overlaid on top of it. But on the other hand, I mean, if people dig technology and they enjoy it, then right on. There isn't a one way to do it. But for me, um, I think the most important thing is you got to have a strong boat. And there's some folks on YouTube now, and you probably know who I'm talking about, who are really good sailors, and their boats have fallen apart on them. And you got to pick a boat that's up to the task of whatever it is that you're trying to do, so you don't find yourself in the situation that they're in. And so that to me is, if you want to sail offshore, you really need a strong boat. And for me, that means a boat like what I have, or something like that. A proven strong, solid, tough boat that's made a lot of voyages, not one where the keel's going to fall off like Tiki Rafiki
Yeah.
or Cheeky Rafiki, whatever it
Kiki
was. That was
Rafiki.
a
Yeah.
horrible tragedy,
Yeah.
just a horrible thing. So I like being able to be in my bunk at night, going downwind. It's blowing 25 and double reef main and maybe a staysail or working jib winged out. And I don't have to be too worried about some disaster right around the corner. I'm pretty confident everything's just fine. So for equipment, to me, a wind vane more than an autopilot, because a autopilot takes power. And now if you had power, you had solar panels and batteries and alternate, all this technology. Wind vane never gets tired, never needs a break, doesn't make noise, doesn't need any energy. And then I have a handheld GPS. That's all I use, and my sextant. I'm working really hard on my celestial, and I take a bunch of shots every passage. I'd like to be able to work, exclusively with my sextant. I'm not far away. I've done star shots and daily line of position. I'm just getting better at it. That's, you need the right set of sails. If you don't have three reefs in your main, you need a trysail, which is what I have. You need a small jib. I just put a furler on my boat. I've sailed at 11,000 miles without a furler. I just put it on. So I'm the jury's still out on that. And I just really don't think you need a whole lot. You need good sea berths. I've sailed all this time without refrigeration. I just put we do a lot of Jeep camping, and I have an Engel refrigerator in my Jeep that I'm real happy with. My wife's really, really impressed with it. And so I bought a smaller version of that, and I've got it mounted in one of my compartments on the far reach, and I'm just going to test it, hopefully write an article for Practical Sailor about it, about what is the cost in terms of energy? How efficient is it? How does it work? What do you really need in there? The old way that we did things, a lot of those that support infrastructure is gone. So, for example, if you want ice, I've always used ice. Ice is getting harder and harder to get, and block ice is very difficult. I carry my own stainless steel trays, and I sort of negotiate wherever I go to get people to let me use their freezer. Like, I'll buy a meal here. Can I use your freezer? And people have been pretty accommodating to do that, but it's becoming more and more difficult. Paper charts. You can't hardly get paper charts anymore. I've got about 400 of them, and I carry paper charts on the boat. But some of those things, you're driven to technology because the way that it was done before, that stuff has gone away. Now it becomes harder to do it the simple way than it is to do it the more technical way. So everybody has to figure that out.
What are you doing for weather? How are you getting your weather reports?
Well, I'm still working on that. I've had great luck with Chris Parker, and that's a shout out to him. He's been really good to me. What I did on my first voyage, well, the first two voyages, I just carried a spot. In fact, I think I've got the old one right here. I just carried this.
Yeah.
And I worked it out with him ahead of time because, traditionally what he did is you call him on the single sideband, uh, and you would say, he would do his morning report, and then all the folks that the subscribers were out there, they'd call in on their SSB, give their location, and he'd broadcast your weather to you. I didn't have the ability to transmit. So he agreed that I could every morning just send him my spot reports. I put him on the little programmed email, and every morning I'd press it, and he'd get an email and it would say far reach, and it'd have my lat long. And then he would just transmit in the blind, is what we would say in the military, without me coming up on the net. He'd say on his single sideband, he'd say, "Okay, I've got the far reach out there. Let me broadcast your weather." And I still do it the same way. I have a little Sony receiver, SW 7600, I think.
I have it
And then
too.
I ran a long wire antenna up my backstay,
Yeah.
and I would just listen to him, and he would come up and say, "Okay, far reach, here's your weather for today, and here's the weather for the next couple of days, and blah, 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 blah." And that's worked fine for me. That's all I get.
Yep.
So I've done that. And then, of course, the spot wasn't that reliable. It uses Global Star, I think. And I eventually went to a Garmin InReach.
Yep.
But we do the same thing. I still just send him the lat long, and he broadcasts back to me on my radio because I like doing it. It's fun, it's
Yep.
rewarding. And that's all I do. Um, we've been talking about my wife or a friend as I get further afield. Once I get beyond Chris's range, like if I wanted to do a translant, once I get out, pretty close to the Azores or something, I'm beyond his range, reliably anyway. What we may do is she just may send it to me via the InReach, look like on windy.com, or look at a couple of different places. I like Luck Grib is a really great software program, and she can look at that and just send me a short version of it, and then I'll have my weather. And I look at my barometer, I look at the clouds. I've got Alan Watts, I think it's his two books on using clouds and things that are going on to forecast your own weather. So I use that because it's challenging, it's fun.
Yeah. No radar, no AIS.
I do have AIS, no radar. And what I did for AIS, when I first took the boat down to the islands, my sister went with me. We double handed. But on the way back, I knew I was going to be single handed. And you're kind of worried about running into somebody because you don't have eyeballs on deck 24/7. So I went to Practical Sailor Archives. I looked at articles, and I saw the article on the Vesper Watchmate. I think Vesper has now been bought out by Garmin, maybe. I'm not sure. But I have a Vesper Watchmate 850 monochrome, and it's a transceiver. So it transmits and receives.
Oh wow.
And I sent all my stuff in. I got my FAA, not FAA, my
Is that FCC?
SCC license for the boat, and registered my transceiver, and I run that now. So it's monochrome. It hardly draws any power because when I got that, the only power I had on the boat was a 30-watt solar panel and a 100 amp hour AGM. That's it. So I needed something really low power. So I would transmit during anytime I was like below for any extended length of time, or when I was sleeping, transmit. And then I was always receiving.
Yeah.
And I found that to be, nothing's going to replace your eyeball.
Yep.
But I found it to be a really good piece of gear. And that's a piece of technology I would certainly recommend. If I had 3 people on the boat, or even 2 people, I don't think you have to have it. But by yourself, I think it's a good idea. That's dedicated only for the AIS. I don't have a VHF antenna. I only carry a handheld VHF.
Oh, okay.
And, you'll see people talk about, well, if with this new AIS, you can get hits at 75 miles. I'm like, I don't care if somebody's 75 miles. I don't care if they're 5 miles away. I only care really if they're going to be within 2 or 3 miles of me. That's the only thing I care about. So that the Vesper has that little filter system in it. So I set it for if a ship is 5 miles away, and it's going to be within 3 miles of me. I want to know. So if it's 5 miles away and it's going to be 4 miles away from me, I don't want you to wake me up. I'd rather sleep than
Yep.
get up. But if it's going to get within about three, I get a little more anxious because if he suddenly changes, I got to have time to communicate and to change change directions or something. So that's how I do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you become a confident sailor if you had to give somebody advice to be more confident and to get out there sailing with less fear?
That's a great question. And it's actually something I've been thinking about talking about. I would call it fear management. Everybody's scared. I've been scared out there. I'm not embarrassed or ashamed at all to admit it. So I think what you do is, first of all, you have to be a confident sailor. And this kind of gets into a topic, I don't know, but you got to be able to do the basics, right? You need to be able to tack, jibe, reef, and do it day or night. You need to be able to handle your boat day or night. So whether you practice on the Chesapeake or you practice in, I don't know, Tampa Bay or wherever you are, you you need to be able to do all those maneuvers day or night. And so you have to have a pretty good solid grip on sailing. Just you don't have to you don't have to have sailed across the Atlantic with somebody else. You just have to be a good sailor. And if you're a good sailor, it's just sailing. But the most important component to that is judgment. So what I kind of tell people is if you're the kind of person that can move through life and not have chaos around you because of the decisions you make, you leave a trail of destruction behind you because you just aren't a good decision maker, you're probably going to have trouble out there. Maybe. But if you're a kind of person that just is sort of conservative, but just a good decision maker, you can separate risk from a gamble and you know how to mitigate it and you think your way through and you plan things, then you're probably going to have good success out there because you can learn the sailing. The judgment part's hard. That's something that you spend your life doing. So, judgment in running your business, judgment in how you lead your family, or you do your job, if you've got those just basic judgment skills, to me, that translates over to other higher risk activities like sailing or climbing or whatever you're into. And I'm a big believer in what's called operational risk management. We do that a lot in the Marines. So, and that's what I tell people when I'm helping people try to gain confidence in it. I'll sit them down and say, like husband and wife, let's go through everything that frightens you. Let's write it all down. Okay. Let's prioritize it. What's the scariest thing that can happen? You work your way down. And then you come up with plans to mitigate that. And once you put that in, it takes that pressure off of your mind. And then, I think it helps your confidence. But the other part of that, I guess the third part of that would be I read a lot. And I think reading about other sailors that have been out there doing it gives you a lot of confidence because you say, John Guswell sailed around the world on a 20-foot boat, and he had sailing experience, but he hadn't done a big ocean crossing like that, and he made it. And you read about the way he makes decisions, and that becomes part of your brain. You have this 5,000-year-old mind now because you're reading all this stuff and you're focusing on the decisions that other sailors made. And I remember before my first offshore voyage by myself, I read Gypsy Moth Around the World with Sir Francis Chichester. And, he was 67. And it was a horrible boat. It was custom built, but it was a horrible boat. And I remember him being in the Southern Ocean and he had a tarp over him and the boat was leaking and the boat was going all over the place and the wind vane was broken. He was doing this. And I thought, he's 67 years old. He's an old guy and he's doing that. I can do that too. I can do that. If he can do that and make it, I can do it too. So those are the kinds of things that I think help you become a confident sailor. But in the end, you just have to realize that I don't think it's that dangerous. I think most of the fear is in your head, and it's good because then you listen to it. Like when I go up on deck at night and it's windy, I have a conversation with myself. Okay, are you thinking this through? Have you done this right? Which side of the boat do you need to be on? Okay, yeah, definitely put my harness on for this. Okay, I'm going to get on my hands and knees and crawl this time. So I think having that kind of fear is a good thing.
Yeah. I like
And so
the
that,
risk management thing. Like there's a couple right now that I'm talking to, and she's afraid of falling off the boat. That's her primary fear. They're just doing Caribbean stuff. And the risk management, I like the idea of, what can we do to mitigate that? Obviously, jack lines and harnesses. And but some of the other things that I suggested are, why don't you have a rule over what wind speed you're willing to go out in? Because you're island hopping, right? You can stay where you are if it's going to be over 22 or and I suggested, because they're on a less than 20,000 pound boat, suggested if it's over 20, maybe don't go. Try to get out there when it's 15 to 18. That's a great time to go. But if it's going to be over 20, and then you can imagine the gusts will be 25 or more, if you have that conversation with her ahead of time, and it would probably make her a lot more comfortable if you set up some rules like that. We won't do this. We won't do this. We won't do this. We'll have jack lines, and we'll not go up on deck unless somebody's in the cockpit. And I like the risk management. That's a really good idea.
yeah, that's perfect risk management. Some things you can add is, well, like for me, I added bulwarks to my boat. I was worried about that, right? So I went to all the trouble to add the raised bulwarks on my boat. And my stanchions are 30 inches tall, not 24. So taller lifelines. And I don't have grab rails on my cabin top. I took them off because of all the holes in deck, but I do run lines from my boom gallows through the dinghy chocks around the mast. So it replaces, they're about 4 inches above the deck. So it replaces the grab rails, and I can use it as a jack line if I need to. I have to unhook to go around it. But absolutely, I think that's how you do it. And you say, okay, your fear is falling off the boat, so we'll do these things. Okay, how does that sound? All right, what's the next problem? What's the next fear thing that we need to work through? And I think that's a good way to do it. I'm I'm afraid. Like my wife was always worried. What if I fell off the boat?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really natural fear. I sent my wife to J World. I wasn't going to teach her that. And, I'd been sailing a long time, and we'd sailed together on some smaller dinghies. But when it came time to me to do this, we were living in Annapolis at the time. And I bought her a week-long course to J World, who I think is just really the competent bunch of folks there. And she went during the week, so there wasn't crowded out on the water. It turned out it was an instructor, one guy and her on a J80 for a week.
Wow.
And they had classroom instruction, and then they went out and they flew they tacked, they jibed, they did man overboard stuff. They did it all without an engine. They flew traditional spinnaker, they flew asymmetric spinnaker. They did all that stuff, and she got the basics from them. And then, I've helped fill in all the other material, the other things that she has to do. But that gave her a tremendous amount of confidence because you don't, if you're not a really good sailor, you don't want the primary sailor something to happen to him. Or if you had a medical emergency, right? You didn't fall off, but you had some other kind of medical crisis and your primary sailor went down. You want to have enough confidence that you can probably get the boat back to, the east coast. You can operate the radio, you can tack, jibe, and reef.
What a great way to send somebody, like you said, rather than the husband trying to teach the wife, to send somebody off to a sailing school where they're professional teachers. I mean, they have a lot
Right.
of experience teaching people how to do this without causing an argument.
Right. And part of the thing too for me was I didn't go with her. I got her a room in Annapolis over like a little breakfast place, and it became a week-long adventure for her to go to. And it that was that was a long time ago. That was 20, almost 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But it wasn't cheap, but it was some of the best money I ever spent.
for people to find you, your YouTube channel is probably the best bet to kind of see what's going on over there.
Oh yeah. I mean I'm spending my time there. I haven't updated my blog recently, but we've been out of the water for a little while. But I usually blog on farreachvoyages.net. Farreachvoyages.com, that's the boat rebuild. That's out there for anybody that wants to see it.
Yeah.
Farreachvoyages.net is the, my blog and all the modifications that we've made to the boat since we launched her in 2015, and then Far Reach Voyages for our YouTube channel where we're, you know, putting stuff out as we can.
I think that there's a big audience in Cape Dory world, because those guys are just an avid owners group, as I'm sure that you know better than I do. And then there's like the people that want to do the ARC rally could probably benefit from some of your experience, and people that want to take a step beyond just buying a white plastic boat could really benefit from your wisdom. But I want to talk to you too about the whole military vet thing and all the stuff you're doing. It's amazing everything you're doing, and the more I watch on your YouTube channel, the more I'm like, I love this guy. Like, he's just, man, great
I
sailor,
appreciate that.
like
That's
great
very nice.
sailor, and a good person, not just a good sailor and a YouTuber, but a good person who's doing good things in the world, which is like something you don't see on YouTube very much anymore.
Well, I appreciate that, Tim. It means a lot to me. And one of the things I always try to get across is I can't tell you how to do your boat. I'm not. I have a long list of people that contact me for some boat stuff, and I try to help them as best I can. But I tell them, I'm not a shipwright. I haven't worked on 50 different boats. I can tell you how I did it on my boat, and you got to figure out how to do it on your boat. So that's really kind of the thing I do. I know how to sort of stay in my, I hate this phrase, but I'll use it. I sort of stay in my lane. I know what I'm good at, and I can talk about how I did my boat and why I did my boat with a lot of confidence and conviction. But that's a funny thing for other people because not I know we got to wrap this up, but I just think it's important people know what their philosophy is about sailing. If you identify with the Pardis or sort of the older style of sailing like Roth or Guswell or the Hiscocks or any of those people, then you can kind of work a boat more like mine. But if you're into the Dashews or somebody else that's got a high-tech boat, the Sundeers and a lot of technology and electric winches and big electronic, networking and all that, you're not going to gain much from talking to me because I can't help you with that because that it's a different philosophy. So you got to know what your philosophy is and then try to mix too many philosophies together because it'll get all boogered up and your boat won't be harmonious.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part is just trying to figure out what you're trying to achieve, and everything else will fall into place. There's lots of resources out there. There's people doing what I'm doing, and there's a lot of books out there. The golden era of sailing, all those books were really pre-YouTube, pre-internet age, and so there's tons of resources for people that want to do it that way.
Yeah. That's John Stone from Far Reach Voyages on YouTube. And if you want to get to know John better or support what he's doing, please head over there and subscribe to his channel. Check out a couple of his videos. You won't be disappointed and you'll learn so much from John. He's out there for a good cause too, trying to help military vets. He's just such an amazing guy and well worth your time. I'll link his channel in the description. If you enjoyed today's adventure, please give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment below for John because I'm sure he'll be reading the comments on this video. And also subscribe to our channel so I can see you again next time.